Awesome. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. I'm Adam Stephensen. I'm an application innovation specialist at Microsoft. I work with customers, helping them envision, where the cloud can help them to innovate, and then helping to bring that innovation to life. And it's an amazing time to do what we do as developers, to actually help, drive value and to develop things and innovate. We had the Azure AI tour here in Sydney last week, and 5,000 people turned up. It was, it was like the event, one of the big events of old. Everyone's turning up. There was technologists, there was developers, there was CEOs, there was CIOs and business leaders, all here to try and understand how AI can make a difference in their business. We're seeing the businesses interested in what we do now. We've got boards asking CEOs saying, what are you going to do to innovate? How are you going to use AI to increase productivity, to save on costs, to increase, our competitive advantage? Previously, CEOs, they didn't really care about our integration modernizations. That wasn't really a big deal for them, saying, oh, we've gotten rid of Tibco, and they're like, I don't know what that is. But they want to know about AI. They want to know that they've got these ideas. They're being asked, what are you doing? And they're now coming to us and saying, we need to innovate. We need to work out what are the ideas that are going to make a difference in our business. We need to work out which of those are going to deliver the most value, and we need to deliver them quickly. I'm seeing pressure on developers from executives that hasn't been there before. So I think developer productivity is a really big deal. I've just realised I'm on the... Sorry. First presentation on an iPad. Awesome. Thanks for that. So innovation is a really big deal, and we're going to be driving it. The developers are going to be driving it. And it's a real opportunity for us to change how things are done. I do a fair few presentations. I've started trying to look at, AI-generated images for my presentations, but it's still easier just to go to Adobe Stock, have a flick through and buy something. I literally laughed out loud about 2 years ago. I came upon this image, and its title was Team of Programmers Working in an Office. That is not what enterprise software development looks like. These people have never seen development. Enterprise software development doesn't look like that. There are real challenges. There are frustrations. It's incredibly rewarding, and that's why we're here. We love it. We're passionate. There's so much to learn, but it's not always easy. There are challenges from getting our machines set up. How do we, there's politics, there's dealing with infrastructure, dealing with security. Why once I've got some code written, it runs on my machine, why does it take months to actually get that to the business to start seeing value? Development's not as easy as it should be. And if they just let us do it the way we wanted it to, life would be so much better for everyone, wouldn't it? Absolutely. But then we go and we talk to the IT teams and the security teams, and they've got concerns, but they're different concerns. What we're trying to do is, find the new tools, find the ways that we can make a difference using what's available to us today. IT and security, and I'm sure that we might have some of those people in our midst today, they care about different things. They care about things like uptime, reliability, high availability, disaster recovery. Not ending up in the newspaper because our security's been breached, like stuff like that. And you go and talk to them, and you talk to them about how can we innovate faster, and they go, those developers are cowboys. And it's the age-old disconnect. This isn't a new problem. And we're seeing organisations transform to solve this. Microsoft went through a big journey on how we put our teams together and our culture to be able to innovate faster. And that's, I'm seeing 2 of my big insurance customers are restructuring their teams and the way they work to be able to deliver innovation faster. But you need serious executive sponsorship to make that kind of a change. So what can we do in the meantime? What can we do to grease the wheels? What can we do to move faster in the organisations that we're in? And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. And some of that is tooling. And then as we're talking around tooling, I also want to think, how can the tooling help us grease the wheels? How can it help us, make life, how can we work better with our security and IT and enterprise architecture team friends? Because at the end of the day, the guy who owns the product, he just needs it delivered. He doesn't care about our problems. He does care about, if he's going to listen to anyone, he's going to care about what security, they as well don't want to get in the newspaper. But what they want to see is they want to see value delivered. And how can we work together to make that happen? What are the tools that are going to allow accelerated delivery of value? And that's what I want to talk about today, is some of the new things that are out that I think actually make a really big difference to a developer's life. But also, how can we use these tools to get security, architecture, and infrastructure engaged earlier in the conversation so that they're actually helping drive the innovation, as opposed to being something that we might need to deal with later in the cycle that is going to cause us dramas? So how can these modern tools help improve our culture and processes? It often starts day one on the project. I didn't finish this slide because all the words I kept thinking of were rude. The number of times I've been a consultant and turned up and started a gig and found out that, who spent more than one day just getting their machine ready to start writing code? Who spent more than 2 days? Who spent a week? Who spent multiple weeks? That is reality. Developers aren't cheap. And what we don't want to be sitting there following who's been given a document and gone, actually, a document's a good thing. Here's a document on how to set up this environment so that you can run the project. Didn't we work out a decade ago that, when we ship to production, this is Damien said, friends don't let friends right-click publish. We worked out a decade ago that deploying to production with a document didn't work. But we start a project and we bring in, some of the organisations I'm working with, they'll bring in 50 or 100 or 200 people at a time, and they're wasting weeks of massive number of people's times getting their environment stood up. It's crazy. So I don't think, deploying dev environments manually should be illegal. It shouldn't happen. But even from a developer's point of view, I want to do different things. I want to be able to go from an old project to a new project, back to an old project, without having to change global dependencies. I want this whole process to be better. So we're going to start off by having a look at GitHub Codespaces. Who said they had already seen GitHub Codespaces? Quite a few. Awesome. Now, I had a great idea a few days ago. I talk about this stuff all the time at work, and I use my very nice Surface laptop. I thought I could do this whole thing from my iPad. So I'm going to give it a go. So please forgive me. I do work from the iPad all the time, but never plugged in, presented in front of a whole lot of people. So yes, we're going to see how this goes. GitHub Codespaces is amazing. GitHub is doing some awesome stuff. I am just going to make sure I am in sync. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into my browser and I'm going to open up a project. I'm going to go and that's the one. I'm going to go and open up one of my projects. So now this is a sample project. Excellent. Okay, this is a sample project. It's pretty cool. It's non-trivial. So this isn't a dinky little app. So this is a web application where you can upload photos of lost pets, and then using Azure Machine Learning, other people can upload photos of found pets and it will match them up and find them. So it's non-trivial. It's actually great. If you want to check, it's a great Dapper example. So it uses Dapper, it uses Kubernetes, all of the fun things. It uses Blazor. If you want to get in and have a look at how can I spin up an Azure Machine Learning example with latest tech, this is actually pretty cool. So it comes in here, it's using Azure Service Bus for communication, it's using some Cosmos DB, it's got a Python backend that's hosted in Kubernetes. So you agree this is non-trivial? So this is the GitHub repository. What's the easiest way to jump in and have a look at the code or edit the code on any GitHub repository? Dot. Who's seen this? dev.github. I can't believe people haven't seen this. This isn't part of my talk, but everyone should know. You can go into any GitHub repo and hit full stop, and it opens the repo in VS Code. Is that amazing? Did anybody else not know that? That's the repo. So as long as you're logged into GitHub, this is free. Dot opens in Visual Studio Code in the browser. This is super wicked. So I can go in here and have a look through the code. I do want to call out, this is not Codespaces. This is Visual Studio Code in the browser. Because of that, I can only get a few extensions and they're just the ones that run in the editor. I can't go in and I can't hit run and debug. Wouldn't it be awesome if I could go into Visual Studio Code in the browser, hit run and debug, it went and got everything I needed to run this application and ran it in a VM in the cloud with all of the dependencies. That's what Codespaces is. So it's the editor in the browser with the back-end compute to be able to execute it. So I'm going to go back out of my cool .VS Code editor. So I'm going to go back to the repository. And now my normal process would be clone this repo locally and go and install all the dependencies. We can go through the docs and there's a great lot. So there's the instructions here. So literally, here's how to run it in a code space. Go into the code space, go open with Codespaces and then go run and debug. That's what you do to run this solution in Codespaces. To run locally, you've got to go and install the Azure Developer CLI, Dapper, Kubernetes, you need Helm, you need Docker. There's still not hard, but, the whole idea of Codespaces is instead of cloning it, we come in here, we would normally clone it here, we go to Codespaces and we go open in Codespaces. So now this is opening up in the browser the same IDE, loading the project in, but as well as loading the project in, it's spinning up a VM in the background in the cloud. And we can see when we come into the project that there's a specific folder for dev containers. And what the dev container does is it says, here's what this project needs to run. So it's just getting the code. I go into my dev container folder and have a look at devcontainer.json. Is that big enough to read? And we can see here in devcontainer.json that it's going and it's using the basic .NET 7 image. It's then going and executing this onSetup shell command. It's then installing some dev container features. So there's a list of about 200 features where you can go and say, give me the Azure Developer CLI, give me Redis, in this case, it's give me Python and give me Docker, so that those features are installed in that VM so that we can execute our code. Then what are my Visual Studio customizations that I'm going to bring into this Visual Studio that's running in the browser? And here's some extra variables. And then it goes and it executes this script, which goes and sets up Dapper, does a pip install for Python, which is getting the packages for Python, and then it does a .NET restore. So this all happens when I go and run that from Codespaces in my repo. I can literally now go in and I could have a look at my extensions. You can see I've got a whole lot of extra VS Code extensions here, including things like GitHub Chat, which if you haven't used Chat, like GitHub CoPilot's amazing. Chat is next level. And go see Damo tomorrow. He'll be talking about / commands. Crazy awesome. So this is gone and gotten my own personal VS Code settings because I saved them on my laptop. So they sync to the cloud and they've now brought those settings down of my preferred extensions and has set them up in the Codespaces VS Code, plus the ones that have been specified in this file. Is that pretty cool? So I've done more talking. I've done way more talking than it takes to actually run it. So I could actually just go in here and go run and debug, just like it said in the doco, and it's going to spin this app up. So it's running a Python app. It's compiling our .NET. This is doing everything it needs to do to run this application. It doesn't have the selected Python interpreter. And off we go. We're going to have an application running from my Chrome on my iPad. Nice. Pretty awesome. I don't have a lot of enterprise customers. There's some looking at this now. This hasn't gotten massive traction, but I think because you've got to do it with cloud native apps that can be containerized. I think as people are looking, I think this next 18 months, when people are looking, how do I go faster? How do I decouple the developers from needing to work with infrastructure? This would be the thing that I'm encouraging people to look at to enable devs to have more control. I think this is pretty amazing. The next step, though, is I'm working on full framework. I'm working on stuff that needs a VM. And that's where DevBox comes in. Azure, I'm going to jump back into my slides. So Codespaces is amazing. It means the mean time to onboard could be minutes. I can code from any device. Doesn't mean that I'm going to do it from my laptop. Realistically, I'd be doing it most of the time from this PC. But it means that I don't need to worry about all that configuration on my laptop. I don't need to install dependencies. They're all running for me on demand, which just means that the whole experience is more standardized. Now, DevBox is the next level. DevBox is, a virtual machine that you RDP into, which when I heard about it, I was like, shut up, not interested. Because, there is pain. I don't know who's done it and had a terrible, terrible, horrible experience. This is still in the enterprise. There is an aging, rusting Citrix cluster sitting in some rack there. That's the last thing to go, and that's what the devs have to RDP into. They don't have, they're underpowered. They don't have admin rights. Trying to get a new one is a nightmare. It takes weeks. This is a big problem. This is not that. Okay, this is my preferred way of developing now. So I'm going to show rather than tell. So I am going to, once again, I could go in here and jump into my browser. I can go in here and I can go devbox.microsoft.com. I'm doing a cheeky little extra on the URL here to enable the customizations feature, which is dropping super soon. I'll talk about that in a sec. But I go to devbox.microsoft.com and it's going to show me my DevBoxes. The key to DevBox, the reason DevBox is different to things like Windows 365 is that it's going to show me my DevBoxes. Who's done Android development? That ruined my life for about 18 months till I formatted my machine because I had to do one project. I installed all this stuff and I ended up with half of my hard drive full of stuff that I just couldn't get rid of. I love playing with new stuff. I come away from a conference like this and I sit in the back of the conference and I install things as people are showing them to me and then all my stuff breaks. The key to DevBox is you don't have a DevBox. You don't have a machine. You have this similar idea to Codespaces, but they're actual VMs and they're VMs based on templates that you create. So what I see really commonly is we're going to have sandbox templates. They're in a safe place. Developers do what you want. Even organisations. I've got a Sydney insurer who's a great innovator. They have a sandpit environment for their developers. Usually they have to whitelist anything in Azure. This is you go and play, go work out what you can do, go have some fun. It's completely disconnected. They run hackathons with hundreds of developers in that environment. It's an amazing place for discovery and learning. So I've got an AI sandbox one. I have different integration ones. I do a bit of Angular. I used to do a bit of Angular. You have your up-to-date versions. This is what I'm working on now, but you might have an older version that's got some older dependencies on it. It means that I'm using the machine that suits the project I'm on now without needing to corrupt other things. They're available in all different sizes and they're managed project by project. The general idea is I can just come in here and go new, type in the name of my my DevBox, which I might be going off to go and do a new expense app. I come in, I choose the team. So individual teams get the ability to choose templates that they want to publish. So I could go and say, I'm doing something for retail banking. I can come and choose then within each team, they can provide multiple templates they're able to choose, which are could be different images, different sizes, different networks. An example of this might be for in my integration projects, we might have different sized images or different sized options for different team members, depending on whether they're offshore, onshore, whether they're leads, whether it's sandbox in a different network, might have different privileges. You might have one for accessing your production environment. It might be, it's different images attached to different networks that then are locked down much more tightly than the other options that are available. So you can literally come through, choose the image that you want, and then this is the new feature that's just been enabled, is then the ability for developers to further customize what their team's given them in a YAML file to say, actually, this is how I want my machine set up. I want VS Code with these extensions and these dependencies installed. So I can come in, choose the customizations file. It uploads it and I go create and it goes and creates me another DevBox. So the process from a developer's point of view is really straightforward. Because the challenges that we have with, there's a bunch of challenges that we have with, standing up VMs for development. Security is a really big challenge. We actually find that the security and infrastructure teams are some of the ones that come to us as real champions of DevBox. They're getting bad reviews from their customers, which are the developers, and they want to do things differently. So what we see happening is security loves DevBox because it's built on top of tooling that they already use. So it uses Intune for as a basis. So it's actually built on top of Windows 365, but gives you then the abstraction for developers to have multiple DevBoxes. So IT comes along, they apply the security policies, and they're the same security policies they're using to manage all the other devices. So I can run DevBox on my work laptop, on my Microsoft managed iPad, but I can't access it from my phone because it's not a it's not a managed device. Work is enforcing security on these devices, so it gives me access to DevBox. So security love DevBox. I've never had security pushback on a DevBox implementation, and they get to apply organizational policies. What then happens is individual teams get to come along and go, here are the specific configurations, here are the images I want to make available to my teams, here's the sizes of VMs, and here is the extra pieces we want to put on top. But then it's really up to developers to come along and use that UI to self-serve their development boxes. So that's what makes such a big difference. So I could come in here and I can open it up. I can open my DevBox direct from my browser, or what I prefer to do is actually just use the Windows client. And I jump in and I say, hey, connect via RDP. And now I've got a full Windows development environment on demand that I can spin up as I need and blow away. The key to it is you only pay for what you use, which is great. So now that I've got my development environment, so we've had a look at Codespaces. We've got the idea. I'm spinning up my development environments on demand with DevBox. I was going to have a look at customizations. So what we want to do when we create a new DevBox is we want to be able to, once again, this whole idea of how do we customize our DevBoxes, our development machines to have the tools that we want to have. There's a really simple, I showed you where I uploaded the file. These files are really straightforward. I can come in here and it's all around creating different tasks. So this is a very simple DevBox customization script where I'm doing a chocolatey install of VS Code, a chocolatey install of Node.js, and then I'm cloning a repo. So it's really simple. I think I'm not the biggest fan of YAML, but that seems to be what we're doing today. So that one's really simple. There's a great repo here of Dev Center examples, and we can go through and we can go and see. So in this example of a DevBox image, we're specifying a base image. We're chocolatey installing Python. We're then executing some PowerShell to install Python and pip installer the robot framework. And then we're going and installing some VS Code extensions into VS Code on that machine. So without belaboring it, there's a whole lot of examples there, but it gives you that ability to go, you know what, I actually am going to, work's going to provide me with these templates, but then beyond that, I know how I like my development machines. Instead of having scripts, I'm going to have desired state configuration that says, this is how my dev machine is. And whenever I create one, I can choose, I'm doing a front-end project. I'm doing an AI project. Here's my different scripts. I can have them in my own repo, or they can be applied as well at a team level to be able to get the development machines the way we want them without having to have really painful, here's how we go through and set up our development environment scripts. Who thinks that's pretty cool? Yep, I think that's awesome. So once we've got a development environment, we're either using Codespaces, we might be working on our local machines, we might be using DevBox. How do we go faster with building our applications? And this is where I've become a massive fan of the Azure Developer CLI. And what this is, who works on Azure? Who builds Azure projects? There's a few. Okay, most like fair whack of the room. So there's a CLI. We're all familiar with different CLIs. This is a differentiator between the Azure CLI, the AZ CLI. There's a new CLI, which is the Azure Developer CLI, AZD. And I'm going to talk about the Azure Developer CLI, but it's more about the principle. It goes beyond, even if you're not going to use the Azure Developer CLI, I've got another financial services customer that's doing the same thing, but using HashiCorp, using Terraform Enterprise. But why this is a really powerful tool, and this is, really coming to pulling in security and infrastructure architecture teams, is let's go and create repositories and let's put all of our code in the repository as well as the infrastructure as code. That's all well and good. And that's not a far out there idea. But what I'm seeing more and more is customers saying, instead of just creating the repositories and putting the code in there, we have a bunch of common patterns. And sometimes they're just starting with, it's often I deal with integration teams a lot or web development teams. We have two really common patterns for integration. We have some kind of an API that sits behind APIM and it talks to some kind of database. That's 30% of our work is covered by that. The other 30% of the work is covered by this particular scenario. Where customers are going and identifying, here are our really common patterns, and let's codify accelerators for the things that we do all the time. And then what we want to do is let's go and find a champion from security and let's come and get them right at the beginning to put everything that security wants, that usually we go to them for months afterwards to get approval. Let's get someone from security on day one and let's go and give them a badge or make them a hat or give them a trophy. And let's tell them we're going to give them an award when everyone says what a good job we've done. But let's go and get someone who's going to come and from day one be an accelerator through our project. Come and tell me everything you need that this is going to need. So when we come to approvals, it's all already done. Get someone from security, get someone from infrastructure, get someone from architecture. And what we want to do is we want to put together a template. Oops. That has everything we need and is ready to deploy. So this is a really simple example. So this is a static web app that's React.js with a C# backend, talking to some blob storage and some SQL Server. It's got Key Vault for storing the secrets, and it's got Azure Monitor for monitoring. The secret stuff and the monitoring stuff, putting it baked into a template that gets deployed on demand. I know I'm guilty of thinking, I need to ship what's on my board. I need to show that this week. I'll come back and do the monitoring later. Am I the only person who's done that? No. So when we bake this stuff in out of the box, it makes such a big difference. And this is what the Azure Developer CLI is all around, is what we've got here is we've got a repository. The repository I'm inceptioned. I was going to hit dot now, but now I'm like I'm inside a. So I'm going to run Visual Studio Code inside a DevBox, but that's not going to work. The reason that's not going to work is it's not going to authenticate me using my Microsoft credentials because I'm inside in temporary credentials. So sorry about that. I'm going to go back. So what we've got here is we've got a folder that's got all of the source code for the two applications. We had a web application, and we've got as well as the web application, we've also got the API. We've also got a folder that has all of our infrastructure as code as either Terraform or Bicep. We've also in here got a folder for either our Azure DevOps pipelines or our GitHub Actions. And so what we've got is we've got everything we need to deploy to go and stand this application up. So we go now, it's got the Key Vault ready to be configured, it's got Azure Monitor. So to go and stand this up, I can actually just go and have a selection of these and go and stand them up from the command line. So if I come in here, no, naming things is hard. What I can do is I can go AZD template list, and that's going to give me a list of all of the publicly available templates. So there's some really interesting ones in here. So if you want examples of how to go and use Azure Search or OpenAI, if you're interested in, it's an interesting read through here. I've found a bunch that are really interesting. You can just come and have a look on the Azure Developer CLI documentation. So these ones are good because they all come with Key Vault. They all come with Azure Monitor. And there's examples across a range of languages, C#, Java, Node, Python. There are starter templates for Bicep and Terraform. And they cover a range of different technologies. I've actually used this. I remember when the Azure Container Apps first came out, I was like, I had to do an Azure Container Apps demo. And I was like, I don't know how to wire that up to Key Vault. I'm really lazy. I went, I think there's a sample in AZD CLI for that. So I went and grabbed it, single line, stood up the whole environment. So I could come in here and, for example, choose this. So there's, things using static web apps. There's examples using Kubernetes. There are full Kubernetes samples. There's Azure Container Apps, which is serverless containers. But really what happens is you come in, you get an architecture, and it tells you the template name. So when you come and do the install, it's literally this easy. AZD, and we authenticate, and then we go and we say, go and deploy this template, and we give it the template name. So back in here, I'm going to need to zoom in a bit. So I can go AZD auth login, and I should already be logged in. Nope. Okay, so I'm authenticated. Okay, so I can literally now go AZD init, and I specify my template name, which is cool. So what that's doing is now I've said go and initialize this repository locally and give it an environment. Okay, so what it's gone is it's gone and found that template, it's gone and got a copy of that repository and essentially brought it locally. If I want to deploy that out to the cloud, all I need to do is AZD up. And what that's going to do is that's going to go and take that instance and go and deploy that out. So that's why this whole idea of going and getting your common architectures, getting them approved and making them as blueprints in your organization to then use with this template is, I'm finding is really accelerating a lot of customers. Now, so this is saying, where do I want to deploy it to? I choose my subscription, I choose my region. Obviously, I can choose any region. I'm going to, and off it goes. That's going to deploy out to the cloud. But hang on a second, you say, that's not using, what DevOps processes are involved in that. And that's done essentially a right-click deploy. So what we can do is we can come in and just go AZD pipeline config, and that's going to go and configure our GitHub actions to whenever we change the repo to then push the changes. We can even go in and do things like set APIM true environment variable, which will then mean that API and that architecture is going to go through APIM in the background. And then we could go AZD down to bring that whole application down. Who thinks that's pretty cool? Yeah, it's really powerful. What's even better than that, though, is when you start looking at the things that you want to build. This is a member of a couple of people on my team. A couple of people on my team built this. So this is the same idea, and this is getting, you're going to hit. So this was one of the big hits at who went to the AI event here in Sydney a couple of days ago, last week? Only a couple. Okay, it was enormous. So the idea of Azure Chat is a couple of people on my team went, we're getting asked to build AI proof of concepts by every customer over and over, and they all have very similar features. What we should do is create an Azure Developer CLI template that lets us start a new AI project in 5 minutes that we can then go through and prove out value. So I've got 2 customers that have got over 100 use cases that they're triaging and proving out. So this is, we've got some people aren't moving, some people are absolutely sprinting to get these into production. So just like everything else, you can literally stand up this full AI application that uses OpenAI, that lets you, I'll come back to the application in a sec, but literally AZD init Microsoft/Azure Chat, and you can stand up this full application. If we go through and we have a look at the architecture, so everything else has gone fine. I'm definitely missing having a mouse on the iPad, which actually does work. I usually use a mouse, there's just not enough desk space for it. But if we come and have a look at the solution overview, so this talk isn't about OpenAI, but what I more want to call out the fact that this is a non-trivial, it's a non-trivial application that's a full AI proof of value using things like cognitive search and document intelligence, the OpenAI service with app service, fully with Key Vault and monitoring, all deployed in a single. So we've got large organisations all over the country using this particular template to go, let's quickly spin up our proof of values on AI. So it's that same idea of let's build a template, customise it. So you can take these, customise them for your own organisation, and then use that as the template to go through and prove out your different value points. Awesome. So we talked about DevBox customizations. The big thing from security, from a DevBox point of view, at the moment when you've got a developer machine, you've got productivity apps, you've got all of your development environments. It's all or nothing from a security posture. Security loves the idea of DevBox because in that development environment, you don't have productivity apps, which is a really common attack vector. And you can go, if I'm working in production, if I need to go into production to debug something, it's a completely different security profile. The tooling that I've got, the security I've got that on that DevBox is completely different to Sandpit, which is completely different to my normal development machine. So security is always a big fan. This is a real world story. So I've got a customer that was over 2 weeks to deploy their .NET. They had 10 .NET apps, pretty standard stuff. ASP.NET, SQL Server, MSMQ. It was 2 weeks to stand up. So they're down to 3 hours now. That's the real world. So it's not instantaneous. And the reason it's not instantaneous is you've still got to install those scripts still have to go and install Visual Studio. It's still got to install SQL Server Management Studio. It's still got to sit there. You just don't have to do it, and you don't have to scratch your head, and the notes don't get lost on how to do it. So that's a real world story that I thought was pretty awesome. Different customer to this one's actually doing much more interesting stuff though. Their developers are using DevBox, but their security team found it and they went, "Oh, this is pretty cool. We're actually going to use this to detonate suspicious packages." So the security guys are using it, and they've got their own DevBox instance where they have all of their security dev boxes there, and they spin those up, put stuff that they're uncertain about in, and then I still haven't found out how they detonate it, but that's what I got told, is that they're using that for detonating packages. So that's pretty awesome. We talked through the Azure Developer CLI. It's meant to accelerate developers' work, but really for me, the key to it is it's bringing, getting the security champion in early, the architecture champion in early, and the IT champion in early. I'm not going to talk about CoPilot too much. We're running a bit short on time. Damo's got a session on it tomorrow. The thing I am going to call out, just because I get asked, I've been asked twice today, and I get asked all the time when I'm talking about CoPilot. So I'm not going to talk about it, except I'm going to do my one minute rant, just because there's a lot of confusion around the security of CoPilot. So I couldn't have a developer productivity talk and not mention it. We've got, Commonwealth Bank came out last week with I think 30% improvement in performance. BOQ is one of my customers. They're seeing 50% across their developers. The real world numbers are amazing, and that's without chat from BOQ's point of view and without enterprise. So that's just going to get better. If your organisation is interested, you should just go and try it. From a security point of view, it's, you need to go back and go, all of the banks are doing it, all the insurers are doing it. This is the whole leakage problem. Is if you're going and using ChatGPT, or if you're using the non-GitHub CoPilot for GitHub CoPilot for business, You have context that goes to that goes to the model, and then you have suggestions that comes back. None of that's written to disk. That's completely ephemeral. It won't end up anywhere else in GitHub CoPilot for Business. Yes, if you go and use ChatGPT, it might be used and it might be come back. But if you use the enterprise tools, you're going to be fine. Just calling it out because I've been asked. It's come up twice today, and I think it's really important. This is, you can tell I've been working hard because I'm in a better, this was when I thought of better together, this is what I thought of. I thought of wine and cheese. I'm definitely looking forward to some wine and cheese this evening. I've talked about a range of different things. I've talked about the Azure Developer CLI, Codespaces, DevBox, GitHub CoPilot. It's not one or the other. If I was setting up a team, I would definitely use DevBox, and I would definitely use Codespaces for the projects that made sense to use Codespaces for. I may or may not use those Codespaces inside a DevBox, but they definitely go well together. I'd be using CoPilot and everything, and I'd be using the Azure Developer CLI. So it's definitely not it's a choice thing. I think these are definitely things that complement each other, just like a nice Pinot and a stinky blue cheese. How am I going for time? This is the other really crucial part, coming back to, for developers to move fast, you need the security and you need infrastructure and you need architecture. This is when I go big picture. What are we trying to get to at our customers? And if you want to move fast, you need to have those people on your team, and their environment that you're deploying to needs to have the right guardrails. I know when I'm talking to my customers, getting secure, compliant landing zones right is absolutely key. If you've got the right governance in where you're deploying your applications, that's work that you don't need to do. And there's no point, as much as you do the security in your application, if where you're deploying your code hasn't been secured the right way, then, you're not going to get the trust that you may want so that you can move at the speed you might want to move at. So getting your landing zones really secure is really important. On-demand environment provisioning is something that I'm seeing more and more. The same way we talked about, I want to be able to spin up a DevBox. Once I've got my development environment, when I hit F5, if I'm not using Codespaces, how can I spin up an on-demand environment and then deploy my code to there? And Magnus has got a talk on that coming up. So this is more and more, this is becoming something that's really important to do. We've talked about the developer tooling, that deployable architectural archetypes. There's all kind of golden images. This idea of a deployable architecture is becoming more and more common and really important. DevSecOps, obviously key, cost savings and controls. And Simone's doing a talk on landing zones and well architected on Friday as well. So there's an amazing amount of content that's related that are going to do great deep dives. And Damien Brady's, if you haven't seen him talk about GitHub, he is the OG. Awesome. And AI is coming. It is, if you're not doing it now, I can't believe the rate at which, before this year, I talked about containers and integration and serverless. 80% of my conversations now around AI. Look, this is not enterprise software development. This is not what it looks like. But it's funny, after putting all this together, I did sit back and go, this could be an architect and someone from security and someone from infrastructure with a developer. This is, if we want to be writing code and we want it to look like this, it means we're going to need to pull extra people in. And, the tooling's not the answer. The people and the process is the answer. But I think the tooling can help grease the wheels. I'm around for the whole conference. I'll definitely be, so feel free to come up and say hi, ask any questions. I get super excited about this. So please come and have a chat. Thanks heaps. What was that? I never even recognised that.